I want to see what did you bring, Connie?
Well, I had a hard time choosing, so I actually brought two things. One is a Montessori peace pole. This is a tabletop version, but these are very well known in the Montessori community. And the other is a bell, and bells are very important in the Montessori world as well.
Ooh, okay, we'll hear more about that briefly. And Nas, what did you bring?
Well, I actually have a quote that I've always liked from Maria Montessori, which is, the child is both a hope and a promise for mankind.
The child, say that again?
The child is both a hope and a promise for mankind.
A hope and a promise for mankind. Ooh, I can't wait to hear them. Like I'm not familiar with any of those, but I'm so glad that I invited you because I'm going to learn something. For those of you who are joining and listening to this podcast, my name is Valerie Hope. I am your host. Welcome to Not Quite Strangers. This podcast, the whole idea is bringing people together who are not quite strangers and build a bridge, build a connection, explore some topics or interesting experiences to inspire curiosity. And who knows, we might even challenge the status quo if we're lucky. I've brought these two wonderful women to join us today because, first of all, I'll just say, Connie, you and I have been friends for like, I don't know, 5 years?
At least, yeah.
No, quite a while. Spent quite a lot of time talking, and you're a director at Montessori school, and I for some reason always feel like Montessori schooling speaks to my soul, so much so that I'm clearly not Montessori school age anymore. But I was like, can I come visit? Can I just see? And now my brother works with you at your school, so we have that wonderful connection. And Nas, you and I have known each other. I think we met 3 or 4 years ago.
I think 4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and you were putting together an event for people in the learning community, right? Corporate learning community. And we just connected. You were there for a pretty important transition in my career,
that's right.
actually.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then we've just, casually stayed in contact, not very often, but somehow I think one of the last times we spoke, you mentioned some of your interest and passion in Montessori education. I think your child goes to Montessori school. I was like, I know you should meet. I'll tell you the real truth, though, is not that just because the two of you are Montessorians. This was actually born of a conversation I had with you, Connie. So this past summer, shortly after George Floyd was murdered and some of the things that were happening in the community, I remember you saying you wanted to really commit to expanding and diversifying, right? Creating more inclusive experience at your school. It's a private school, fairly affluent community, predominantly white. And in our conversation, you were talking about connecting with other Montessorians. And when I asked, like, well, who's in the group? All of them were white, I believe, and female. And I was like, oh man, maybe you should meet some other Montessorians from other backgrounds. And the only other person that I knew that had any kind of Montessori background that was not white and female was Nas. Of Indian descent. So I was like, oh man. So I hoped by connecting the two of you that there would be something sparked. And you said you exchanged emails, but this is your actual first time meeting. So
that's right.
All of that to say, welcome to the show. And thank you for saying yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Well, before we go into the items, I'd like to know, what had you say yes? Like, why even connect with another person? Even the emails that I had when I introduced you, why did you even say yes to that or try?
Yeah, from my perspective, I always feel like it's nice to meet new people because I think it broadens your perspective, broadens your horizons. And I just thought, you and I maybe had met quite briefly in the grand scheme of things. We maybe spent a couple of days together and we stayed in touch. And I thought, it's nice to actually just sort of leverage that kind of relationship to learn more and to learn, to meet new people. And so for me, it was a pretty easy yes, actually, because, I had the relationship with you and I saw how that grew. And I thought it'd be nice to make another connection, particularly one, I guess, in the Montessori space where, like you had said, my experience has mainly been as a parent. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of get a different perspective on things as well.
Ooh, adventuresome. And what about for you, Connie?
Similar, actually. I feel like, Valerie, when you and I met, we just had this instant connection. And so when you asked, when you first mentioned about connecting me with Nas, I always want to be of service in the Montessori community. It's something that's a big goal for me, because there were so many people who have been of service to me in my experience in the Montessori world. So it's been something that for the last 15 years, I have really committed myself to, is, if somebody needs anything, if it's a place to stay when they go through Montessori training, or a listening ear, or a connection, that I was going to commit to that, because it felt very much like a not really pay it forward, right? Because I was a recipient at one point. So full circle, like that I had received so much from other Montessorians in my early years, that I wanted to be that resource for others. But then honestly, also, like, anybody who's cool by Valerie is cool by me. So, oh, I get to meet another of Valerie's, cool people. So
that's the bar. Only cool people get on this program.
So you're in. Well, yeah. So it was a really easy yes for me too.
Well, thank you. I don't take that for granted, because I know even when people have asked me to meet somebody, I'm a little bit like, why? Like, I'm a little bit more controlling about who gets in my space. And so I find myself being a little bit more like, I'm not sure, tell me more, sell me on this. But the two of you are both so generous, right? So that's why I thought this would be a really fascinating conversation. But I asked you specifically to share more about your Montessori experience, because it's such a unique type of education. So maybe just to start off, you might, I don't know, who would like to, maybe both of you can share, what is Montessori school education for somebody that might be listening or watching and going, okay, what is that? I've heard of it, but I have no idea what's different about it than a typical public school education in North America, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'll defer to Connie on that one.
Well, there's so much to it that sometimes it can feel challenging to refine it down to, let's say, an elevator pitch. But I would say Montessori education puts the child at the center of everything that we do. And, I've been doing this for almost 25 years. And I will say still every day we have the conversation about, well, how will this decision impact the child or the children at the school? So we really commit as Montessorians to make decisions based on what's best for children. And so I think, that really, it's a very child-centric approach. And it's what the education world, we call it a constructivist education. So rather than thinking that as teachers, we put information into a child's brain, the constructivist approach believes that we're always drawing out. And so John Dewey, who's a real early pioneer in constructivist education, used to say, the root word of education is educare, which means to draw forth. So that our goal is to inspire and interest and connect children to materials that will develop their learning. And so Montessori teachers are really considered guides more than teachers, more than a teacher in the traditional sense, with the goal being to draw forth all parts of a child. We're also very whole child educators. So it's not just about the academics, it's about their social development, their psychological development, their emotional development. And so all of those things come together to, really respect the child on their journey through their life.
That's one of the reasons that I was so fascinated by it, because I'm a leadership coach, right, by profession, but I've always had that interest in keen, instinct to develop people, and always assuming that they already know what they need to develop. It was just me supporting and guiding, perhaps a tool or a resource to help sharpen it, but for the most part, drawing it out. And that doesn't even happen in the workplace that often, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's not constructive, it's definitely more instructive, right? It's giving others. And so I thought, this would be a really fascinating conversation to have and to continue to grow. And for you, Nas, I'm curious about why you decided to invest in Montessori education for your child or your children.
Yeah, so my introduction to it actually came from my mother-in-law, who had, after a career in the corporate world, decided she wanted to be a Montessori teacher. She's never one to sort of sit idle. And so she, once she retired, actually went to Montessori school and like learned how to be a Montessori teacher, did the placements and so on. And so, and she just, and it's very much, I almost learned from her about a lot of the principles that Connie was talking about just observing the child. She would come over when I had my two sons, when they were both babies, and she would just sit and watch them.
Mhm.
And I was like, she's being awfully passive. You often grandmothers are going to be like super doting and you're trying to do everything. And she could sit for hours and just watch them. And just, she all these observations. And even to this day, so I have two sons, they're 8 and almost 6 now. And she'll say, did you notice that one of them did this or one of them did that? So she taught me to do that more, to just sit there and observe. And so I'll just sometimes sit there and just watch them. And and it's very much around, they'll pick up an object or they'll look at something and they'll look at it in a different way. And it's because of, they were both in Montessori from when they just turned 2. And my oldest son graduated a couple of years ago, and my younger son is about to graduate because the Montessori we were at, they just went until they were 6 years old. But I found it was such a great grounding for them. So part of it was, well, my mother-in-law said they should go to Montessori, so I'm going to send them. But then having seen it through her eyes as somebody who was a teacher, and then experienced, what the boys did in school and the teaching method and so on. This, like Connie was saying, the vast array. It's not just academics. It was, they learn about practical life. They learn, they water plants. It's things like that, the practical side of things as well, which I was just really drawn to. And I thought, wouldn't this be great if it was something that more kids could have access to? And be able to take advantage of. So yeah, I'm sort of a firm believer in it, just my own personal experience.
Oh, 100%. Oh, this is going to be exciting. I have so many more questions now, but I want to go back to the objects, because clearly not only have you devoted, right, your life, your time, your finances, your energy to encouraging Montessori education, but it sounds like there was an emotional connection for you as well. So let's start with Connie. You brought a couple of objects. Tell us more about them. What significance do they have for you?
Yeah, so my Montessori peace pole, it's very common to see peace poles, life-sized peace poles in the garden areas or the entry areas of Montessori schools. Dr. Montessori firmly believed that educating for peace was an important part of our world with children. She actually lived through both world wars and was exiled during World War II. Sorry, my tongue's a little tied today. During World War II, was exiled to India. And so she saw the impact during her work, within her work during the World Wars, how that impacted children. And so she firmly believed that if we were to establish lasting peace in the world, it was going to be through the education of children. So we actually have peace education curriculum in Montessori classrooms. And honestly, most of it is centered around healthy conflict resolution strategies. So we, what I know now, use the model that is grounded in non-violent conflict resolution, and we teach it to children at a very early age. At the moment they can begin to speak, we teach them how to express themselves, ask for what they want from another person, and accept the other person's answer, whether it is meeting that want or need or not. And so, those kinds of strategies are just, we need them in the world so much. And so the Montessori Peace Pole really means a lot to me. The other thing that really speaks to me about it is, it's the quote on it is, "May peace prevail in the world." And it's written in English, but then it's also in other languages. So my little desktop peace pole just has 4 sides, but often peace poles have 6 or 8 sides, and it has many different, that phrase in many different languages. And that reflects the inclusiveness that, Dr. Montessori saw as really important part of a child's development too is understanding people around the world, and that she was blessed to live in many different areas of the world and saw different ways that people lived and realized that that's what children really needed. And then I have a bell. And so in a Montessori setting, anytime we need to get the children's attention, we use a bell. And they use it as well if they want to get each other's attention. So, in traditional settings, there can be more assertive ways, maybe even sometimes aggressive ways to get a child's attention. But because our environments are very free moving and there's a lot of activity going on, we like to use just a very little, ring of the bell, and we wait until everyone is giving us our attention, and then we give information. So the bell is a really critical part of a peaceful, harmonious classroom.
Peace and harmony in the classroom. Oh my goodness. It's not what you hear often, especially in, I don't know, North America for sure. I'm not certain, what it's like in Canada, but in the US, obviously, there's a lot of challenges. There are a lot of challenges in education. I'll just leave it at that. We might unpack some of that, maybe not. Yeah. I do want to say, I think, Connie, you were talking, is it the nonviolent communication? Is that what you're saying? Okay, yes. I love that. I teach it all the time to my coaching clients. So if those of you who heard it, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg is game changing in how to express your needs and share feelings in a way that really creates dialogue as opposed to shut it down or having people conflict and battle it out. So thank you for sharing that. And Nas, tell us your quote one more time and then the significance for you.
For sure. Yeah, I was actually just going to comment on the bell insofar as I thought it's interesting where it's like that one signal that everybody knows and understands. It's almost as if adults sometimes need that one signal, right? Because there's mixed signals all the time where like somebody wants somebody to stop and they don't know, or to pause or something. Whereas like if you hear the bell, it's almost Pavlovian, I guess, right? It's like you're like, okay, yeah, something, something's forthcoming, from the teacher or something like that. So yeah, I think that that's a useful tool. So my quote, the child is both a hope and a promise for mankind, which, Connie and I didn't talk before today, but it almost like dovetails so well into what she was saying about, about peace and, about just, I guess, the future of humanity, if you will, and the importance of children, and how that philosophy of, a lot of times kids will start Montessori as early as 18 months, sometimes even earlier, depending. I know they sometimes have infant classrooms and so on. And just starting them learning that early, I think is so important because they're really the ones who are going to be the future. And they're really sort of that getting the grounding in that kind of philosophy, that kind of nonviolent communication, the kind of honest, respectful dialogue, I think is really important as we look to the future, as we sort of consider even the world that we're in right now and everything that's been happening. Not just at the macro scale of what's going on, let's say in the Middle East, for example, but even if you look at the local level at, how people sort of, when in a situation like COVID, would turn, one another or different perspectives on, whether it's, what's causing it, what's the government doing about it, what's going on with vaccinations, should people get, whatever the perspectives are. It was just this like, I'm not going to listen to you because it's not what I think. And people lose that ability to communicate with one another, and then ring the bell to tell them to stop.
I'm gonna buy a bell and I'm gonna carry it in my purse.
Yeah, that's right.
The grocery store, to the bank, the auto shop.
Information.
Yeah, and you'll know the Montessori students because they're the ones who will stop.
My teacher here.
Yeah.
I want to contrast this a bit with your own education. I'm assuming that the two of you did not attend Montessori school growing up. No? Okay, got it. So now I'd love for you to contrast a bit of, what was it like when you went to school? Like some of the things that you remember that stood out in your experience versus what you see or wish perhaps your education could have been now working or, having been a part of Montessori culture. Whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. As I was listening to you ask the question, my initial response was, listen, I grew up in rural northern Michigan. So, the education couldn't have been more different than a Montessori education. But interestingly, now I'm realizing, the sense of community that I grew up in. The town I grew up in was a population of 900 people, and our house was 7 miles away from the town. So, when I'm talking rural, it was really rural. So the positives of that were, it was like it takes a village to raise children kind of place to live. There were certainly times when I felt disadvantaged by that as an adolescent. It was like, oh man, somebody told my dad that I did this,
Yeah.
But that sense of community, the people I graduated with were the same people that I went to kindergarten with when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
And so some comings and goings, right? But, and I still connect with those people today. So, when I talk about, my friends from high school, they really are my friends from childhood. I've known them almost my entire life. And so, there is a significant component to Montessori education that is centered around building community. And in that way, there are similarities. Everything else, it was a putting in kind of education, right? Which is what, traditional education is designed after. And so, becoming a Montessori educator, and this is true for a lot of us, it's almost a healing of that educational experience. I was not particularly inspired by my education growing up. It took me many years to graduate from college, and I eventually pursued a master's, but I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree at 35. I never really felt inspired to do what it was that I wanted to do. And I most of my life didn't know what that was. So, when I see the inspiration that is fostered in children in a Montessori setting, there's a very sharp contrast for me. And watching my children, grow up and go out into the world. And, they didn't necessarily know like exactly what it was that they wanted to do. And I think today we accept that, what it is that we're going to do in our life evolves over time. And the beauty of a Montessori education is that it really, I think, paves the way for that kind of idea of, that we as humans are always evolving and growing. And so the path on the journey might, take a little veer to the right or a little veer to the left, or a big veer to the right and a big veer to the left. So, I didn't, I guess, didn't know anything different when I was in it. So I wasn't particularly unhappy in my education as a child. It's just in the contrast now of what I know now versus what I experienced then.
Oh, that's huge. I mean, I can't relate at all because we left Panama when I was 9. So I was third grade, and we immigrated to the States. And then I think the first 3 years in the States, I went to 3 different schools because my dad was in the US military. So we moved to a couple of different, depending on the base, we moved to another base. Therefore, we had a different school system. And I went to school in Georgia, I think 3 different elementary schools there, then went to elementary school in Hawaii, and then middle school in Hawaii, and then high school in Alabama. And it's like, you can just imagine.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think I just survived it. I would say, my educational experience, I would just say I survived it, meaning not like there are no gangs in our school, at least not that I could tell. So not that kind of survival, but the survival as in, let me just get in and get out. Let me just get my diploma. Let me just get my, it was more, I don't recall. I mean, there may have been some moments, maybe when I was in band in high school, my 11th and 12th grade. That was probably the time where I felt I thrived, that like I really came into my own because of the leadership roles that my band director had. He was much more constructive in his approach. And that's probably why I responded so well. But overall, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just kind of like, let me out of here when I'm done. So I'm a little jealous to be told of Montessorians. But Nas, what about you? Tell us about your background or anything you want to comment on after.
Yeah, I love Connie's thing about the village. Like, I'm so enamored with that whole notion, but like you say, there's a flip side to it, but I'm always, enamored with this whole idea of, building a community or having a community around you. I was born in Kenya, so I grew up going to British-run private schools, and yeah, that was very much, the British system is very much, learn by rote. You memorize things. Not a great deal of room for creativity or thinking outside the box. It was very sort of almost formulaic. And almost that, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but almost as if, okay, you're in school until you're 18, or if, until you're 22 when you go to university or whatever, but, and then the education stops, right? And there isn't that sense of like, well, I have to continue learning through life. It's almost as if you have to know what you were going to do. And with the British system, when you're 13, you pick 8 subjects that you want to take. And then when you're 16, you pick 3. So you narrow yourself down so much at such an early age. Whereas, when I learn about what high school was like, even in Canada, where, you have to take so many subjects and you have to take math and English, all the way until you finish high school, I thought, that sort of broadens your options, even the 4-year undergraduate degree, versus somewhere like England, where you could just go and get a law degree and be done in 3 years. So a cousin of mine, we graduated at the same time, but by the time she was 21, she was a lawyer. If you come to Canada or the States, you do your 4-year undergrad and then you do your 3 years of law school. So it was just such a difference where the British almost have you specialize. Whereas I find now the world is so much more about a variety of skills, leveraging different skill sets, and just that evolution that Connie was talking about how you don't have to, I always grew up just thinking I need to know what I'm doing for a career, and it needs to be set in stone. There's no moving around, there's sort of, you have to stick to what you picked. And so in a way it's nice, Connie, as you speak about your children, kind of forging their own path, but being okay about not knowing that path, and veering from the path if you need to veer from the path. I always like hearing stories about people. That's why with the work I do, I create events for executives. And one of my favorite parts is when I confirm a speaker and they send me their photo and bio, because I'm avidly reading that bio, because I love to find out, where did they start? Where did they end up? You find out the most amazing things, people who were in one career that completely made this switch. And I just thought that was so interesting. And to tie it back, Valerie, to how you moved around, I find Americans are so mobile. Somebody who, they worked in Hawaii, then they went to, Arizona, now they're working in New York, and it's like there's nothing to the mobility. Whereas in Canada, you rarely find people moving between the major cities. In fact, there's this sort of identity that you create with your city. So it's rare, like you'd rarely find people going back and forth, unless it was for business or for travel, vacation and so on, between like Vancouver and Toronto, for example, or Toronto and Montreal. It's like you have this core identity as like, well, no, I'm from this city, and there's less mobility. Whereas I was always fascinated by, it just the American, maybe it's that sort of the traveler, adventurous kind of spirit, the seizing of opportunities, going wherever the opportunities are. But yeah, I'm always interested in sort of seeing, well, somebody went to school and did biology, and now they're like, they're now, kind of this like other kind of executive or doing something completely different. I'm always interested in how people's careers take twists and turns around the place.
How they move. Well, you moved, right, from Kenya. How'd you end up in Canada, in Toronto?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So we, I think by virtue and I guess privilege of being at a private British school, your options were open in terms of where you went for university. Nobody typically stayed in Kenya because the tertiary level of education wasn't great. We actually had pretty good primary and secondary level of education, but at the tertiary level, it wasn't that great. So you typically would go to the UK because we were a former colony. But I remember, the resources in our library. Now, bear in mind, it's interesting because I went to this private British school, which you would think would have, these state-of-the-art facilities and so on. I took classes in sort of standalone rooms that were like, where the walls were held up by termites, like the termite mounds, like it was so random. Like we had actual buildings, but then we also had something that you would think, yeah, that's Africa. That kind of makes sense. You're just in this kind of like hut in a way where it was like, I'd sort of look over to the side. I'm like, oh, there's like a termite mound right over there.
They're holding up the wall.
Room. But the teacher was great. It was a great education, but, and so our resources, I mean, university had on one of the shelves, there was like this big of a sort of like stack of catalogs or something, for universities. 80% of them were British. And of the remaining ones, there was only one Canadian university, which was McGill University in Montreal, because they really sort of emphasized their international presence and so on. And so didn't have a ton of resources. My brother, who was 2 years older than me, had applied to universities in Canada. We had quite a bit of family in Canada, and I thought, okay. And when I think back on my university application process, I'm horrified, because I just think I literally took his like addressed envelopes that he didn't send. There were 7. And I was like, I don't really want to go to Alberta, and I don't really want to do a co-op program at this place. 5, I just applied to them. I didn't know anything about them. Like I knew a couple in Vancouver. We had some family in Vancouver. I ended up getting a scholarship and going to a school called Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. At that point, Kingston for me was the capital of Jamaica. I'm like, no idea. Like, I'd never been to Ontario. I'd been to Canada several times, but all our family was on the western side of Canada. I packed my bags, I had 2 suitcases, and I just arrived. And when I think back, I think, what was going through my mind? What was going through my parents' minds? Like literally across a continent, across an ocean. And I just kind of, went with my brother, and they just said, I said, well, weren't you worried? And they're like, no, we raised you to be smart. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, you try. I just don't know if I would trust my kids to do that today. I think, parents have changed, right? You're sort of almost so much more protective. And yeah, so ended up in Kingston, and which is about 3 hours east of Toronto. And then generally when most people graduate, they'll kind of gravitate towards the bigger cities, which is why I ended up in Toronto. But yeah, it's, in hindsight, I mean, yes, it all worked out. But when I think back, I'm like, how did I even think this had a chance of working out, not knowing anything? Whereas now people will say, oh, we took our, one of my clients is saying that, oh, we went on an RV trip this summer. I was taking my sons to colleges. And I'm like, you look at colleges before you what is this strange notion?
It's a thing.
So yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do any of that either. I just wanted to go to school wherever my friends were, which happened to be a local community college. And right out of high school near the military base where we lived. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go there. That's where my friends are. And my dad was like, nope, you're going to 4-year school. They hadn't gone to 4-year school, but they thought that was too important a time to, piddle that away. They're like, no. And my older brother was actually going to the same school. So I was like, fine. He was 2 years ahead. And I literally was kind of grudgingly like, fine, I'll just go to the same school. It's fine. Yeah. And oh my gosh, college again was just such a wonderful experience. For me, it was a constructive experience because I created that. I think I had the opportunity to now exercise some free will. Whereas I think in my primary education and secondary education, I didn't. So yeah, what did you study, Nas?
I did political science.
Political science.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started off, the hut that I studied in that class was economics, which I loved. It was like my favorite course. And I thought, oh, I'll go do economics. But it was very different. Again, like the British system, it was like I could write lots of essays about economics, but I didn't have the quants. I didn't have the math behind it. And because we weren't required to take math until we finished high school, I sort of lost a lot of it when I, finished. And so I remember going to, I went to a couple of economics class first year, and then we went to a tutorial by the TA, and it was supposed to be review, and he was going across the whiteboard and writing all these concepts, and it was like symbols to me. I was like, and I turned to the person next to me, I'm like, is this review for you? They're like, yeah, we did in high school. I'm like, I was like, I cannot do this. I can't say economics. Like, this is crazy. So, and then not only knowing sort of the options, right? Because you had a few options of picking courses and so on, but I didn't realize how much of an option you had. I only recently found out actually that I was, I could have just completely switched majors once I was, I switched from economics to politics, but I could have gone into, commerce, for example, which almost seems like a better fit for me now because I'm in the corporate world. But I ended up switching to politics and loved it. And then realized that sometimes it doesn't matter what you take as long as you enjoy it, because then you'll really enjoy, you'll excel at it and it'll be interesting. So yeah, so I did, but because my dad, I remember my brother calling my dad saying, so she's switching out of economics, and phone card, crackling line, my dad in Kenya going, what what's she doing? It's like, well, she's going into political science, like politics. And you think about the politicians and, my dad's like, she wants to be a politician? It's like, no, she's just going to do politics. It might lead to something, who knows? Maybe she'll be a lawyer. Maybe she'll go do something else. But, because
it has a whole different connotation.
It's just like, what does that mean? What does politics mean exactly? I know.
Connie, I see you nodding. So what's your reaction to all of that? Or in your own experience, what resonates?
Yeah, so many parts of that resonate. Even some of the comments you were making, Valerie, when I graduated high school, I mean, neither of my parents, none of my aunts or uncles, I'm from a big Catholic family, their college was not what happened after high school. And so, but my older sister had gone to college and, straight out of high school, she went to University of Michigan and, so very well renowned and prestigious school. And so, I think she said to me when I was graduating, you're going to college, right? And so, but I had a similar experience to yours, Nas, in that I just had the hardest time in college with physics. I could not, for the life of, must have taken physics 4 or 5 times, could not pass that class for the life of me. It wasn't until finally I had gone to community college through my 20s. I had fallen in love when I was 21 and got married and had babies. And, so I took classes here and there, and then, later in my 20s discovered really that education was my path and, really switched gears. But I finally went back I was at Michigan State, could not pass physics for the life of me. I finally went back to community college and took a pre-physics class and realized like, oh, I never had any of this in high school, right? And I'm sure there was a guidance counselor, like I have this vague recollection of a guidance counselor telling me that I should have taken, like, yeah, you should, this, your senior year, make sure you take this. And I clearly didn't, but that was the extent of it. Just similar to your collegiate experience. Like, no, my parents were not involved in that process, and probably nor would they have really recognized that I needed to take pre-physics. So, but it actually wasn't until I started teaching in a Montessori middle school and I had to teach science that I finally like, oh, that's what physics is about, right? So I thought, oh man, if I had this when I was in middle school or high school, I would have been fine in physics class. But I just I would feel like, God, my brain just doesn't work that way. I do not get this stuff. So it was that, clearly a gap in my educational experience leading up to. But then I was a non-traditional student. I didn't realize that's what I was. When I went to Michigan State, I had gone to community college in rural northern Michigan, and kind of the same as you, Valerie. I had a couple of friends that were going there out of high school, and I hadn't really applied to any four-year universities. I think I applied to Michigan State and didn't get in, or I can't remember. So I went to, the big city, which was, Traverse City. I think the population was like 90,000 people. So
that's big, from 900 to 90,000.
Right?
More.
That felt big to me. I got through my freshman year barely, and it just was like, I'm not sure this is how I should be spending my time or my money. And so I went back home for a year, and then my brother was living in Lansing, Michigan, and I felt like I'd actually had a bit of a personal crisis and I needed a change. And so moved down to Lansing, and then that's where I met my first husband. He's the father of my children, but we are not currently married or not married any longer. I'm
like, currently,
right? Yeah, like maybe we will be again. No, we will not.
We haven't talked in a few
maybe
weeks,
next week. Be certain about that. And so when I went
Brian
to Lansing,
know,
right? Yeah. So when I went to Lansing, I just started taking classes at the community college. But again, I did not know what I wanted to do, and so I did. My family was in business. We had. My mom was the head accountant for the resort in the town that we lived in. My dad was a realtor, but we had owned restaurants throughout our lives. And so I just was taking business classes and not particularly inspired by them, but just thought like, well, this was what my family does, so I might as well do this. And even after getting married and having the kids, I'd take a class here and a class there. I was just kind of like, nothing really got me motivated. So, and I always felt like I wanted to get my bachelor's, but like in what, So when I was in my late 20s, I was experiencing a divorce and, had young children. I think my girls were, 4 and 5 years old at the time. And so I had gone to a retreat where one of the activities was discovering your life's purpose. And lo and behold, who knew it, that I just was meant to be an educator. And I know that sounds a little corny, but it's so true. Like as soon as I discovered that, it was like, oh yeah, this is it. I had always growing up gravitated towards hanging around with the little kids. Again, big Catholic family, like every possible event, whether it was birthdays, Memorial Day, Labor Day. I mean, a gathering with 90 to 100 people, so
Yeah.
I'm one of 6 kids. My mom's one of 7. We all lived in this rural area. And so it has led itself to being, exactly what I know I'm supposed to be doing. And so at a certain point, it transitioned from, directly teaching children to teaching adults. And that has come to me at different times in my life through practices. Valerie and I have a similar connection in our spiritual life of the Unity Church. And so one year in the White Stone ceremony, I was asking for guidance of like, what is it I'm supposed to be doing right now? And it was still teach. And, so that's been a constant theme in my life. And, once I figured that out, school was so easy isn't the right word, right? I was motivated. I think you used that description, Nas, right? Inspired, right? It was hard. I was a single mother with 2 little kids. And so I would, go to classes when they were at school. I would tuck them into bed at night and stay up until midnight and do my homework and then get up in the morning and do it all over again. But there was a purpose behind it. And so, I had to do it slowly. I figured that out at 29 and went back to community college to get as much of it done as I could, because again, I was a single mother, so I had to do it the most inexpensive and flexible way that I could. And then, transferred to Michigan State when it was time, and I couldn't take any more classes at the community college. And it wasn't until I was there that I heard the description of non-traditional student. Like I've never really seen myself as non-traditional, but I certainly have not also seen myself as traditional. And I've always just kind of done what I felt drawn to doing. And it was funny, a couple of years ago, my childhood girlfriends and I were together and just kind of reminiscing. And one of them said, yeah, you've always just kind of done, what you wanted to do. And it's like, that has never occurred to me that that's how I've lived my life. But when I reflect back on it, it's true, that I've just, for some reason, I certainly had other inhibitions, but I was uninhibited about, following whatever I was inspired by, or what I would now say, whatever my truth was. Even if it meant getting pushback from, people who I valued and respected. So that's, it was actually a very accurate description. It's just something I'd never really considered before.
Well, that's I think the beauty of education when done, let's say there's not like a right or wrong, but I think when done in alignment with the individual, right? When we do it in alignment, then it could be very inspiring, very, very purpose driven. And for some, the need for structure and design and instruction is important, right? And I think for me, I made it work. I was a fairly decent student. I was like in the, the top, 30, 35 of my class of 200. So not bad. And in college, I maintained like a 3.0. So in the grand scheme of things, I did okay as a student, but I never really felt the inspiration that I feel now as a professional. I hosted a couple of Connie's students in a business internship earlier this year. And it was so fascinating. One, because at first I was kind of like, I'm kind of a non-traditional business person, too, right? And you all mentioned this idea of being creative And I always found that that's what was missing in my education, and what I see missing in the business. And Nas, I want to hear what you're hearing and seeing now, especially dealing with corporations. But for me, it was like, that's the part that I want them to experience, that business doesn't have to look a certain way. And you can still wake up every day committed to what you're doing, and still feel, be fulfilled and achieve the goals that you have. And so it was not only a wonderful, fun experience, but I thought it was a nice experiment for me to also validate that how I do things and what I do has the intrinsic value. Like, okay, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. And it doesn't have to look like everybody else. And, everybody else, do what makes sense to you. Do what aligns with your soul, with your core, with your values, with, whatever your external needs and expectations are. But it was like, oh, I can now do this in my whole life. It doesn't, I can design it. So yeah, it's that for me has been the biggest win, I think. When you and I met, I was leaving Hyatt. So Connie,
That was your transition time.
It's huge. It's huge. So I just, so I think you and I connected, Nas, maybe a few months before that, like let's say 6 months or 9 months before, because I was going to be a speaker at one of your events. I was facilitating a workshop. And I was there to represent the company Hyatt, I worked for, Hyatt. And so, but then when Hyatt underwent this whole big change, they eliminated my department literally 3 weeks before the event.
It was 3 weeks. But it was interesting because it was 3 weeks before the event was supposed to take place in 2017, I think. And then there was the hurricane, and we were supposed to be in Atlanta.
Yes.
Hilton Head. And we'd never postponed an event before. I mean, this is pre-COVID, right? So never postponed an event. And then we're like, oh, we're going to have to because we were supposed to be at Hilton Head Island, and they shut the island down. They're like, we don't care what the hotel says. We don't care what you say. Like, we're shutting the island down. And so then we switched it to December, if you remember.
Yep.
And it was unusually cold, and the hotel wasn't equipped, kind of almost like when you guys had your snowstorm, because they had space heaters. Do you remember how cold?
I don't remember the cold, but yeah.
That's good. It's good you don't remember that. Yeah. But it was,
I had so much going on back then.
I know, but that was what's interesting is that tradition, typically with our events, I mean, when you had called me, technically I should have said, well, you're not at Hyatt anymore. We wanted that perspective, but I've always sort of been this big believer in, it's my mind is sometimes split insofar as I've grown up, and speaking to what you were saying, Connie, as well, it's sort of in that traditional way. I always thought you were born, you go to kindergarten, you go to primary school, secondary school, university, you get married, have a job, you have kids, you die. For me, it was linear. Life is always linear, right? And so for me, I feel like I didn't sort of go that route of, I didn't go get a second degree, or I didn't become a lawyer. I found my autograph book from when I was in high school, and people would write, and one of my friends said, you're going to be a lawyer. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll be a lawyer. But I never kind of went that route, but I still kind of followed this linear thing. And now I find that I'm at this point in my life where I'm like, do I have to stay on this kind of same trajectory and same thing, or can I change things up? And when you talked about designing, I just got this book at the library. It's called Designing Your Life.
I think I have that.
No,
I don't have that. I have it on my Kindle.
Oh yeah, see there, yeah. And I just started reading that, and it was this whole notion of you can design it. It doesn't have to be designed for you, and very much along. And I find what Connie was saying so inspirational. I mean, clearly it was sort of, you probably didn't realize it, but the value of education, you ending up in education. And because you could have very easily, sort of thought, well, I've had my kids, I'm married, this is who I am. I'm a mom, and I have my kids, and that's what I'm going to do. But it was you just kept taking courses. And I was like, why did she keep taking courses? Why? It's because it was important, right? It was something about education that made you think this is something that's important to pursue. But yeah, you kind of get to these crossroads, and they're scary. I admire what you did, Valerie, in terms of when you leave corporate America, it's because what I find with talking to people is that there's always this, I'm a manager, now I'm a senior manager, now I got to get to the director position, now I got to be senior director. And that it's always, you're constantly reaching for the next thing, and to then not be in it, to sort of leave it. There's that scary part of well, what if I want to get back in, do I have to start all the way at the bottom again? Or what do I do? sort of that element of bravery and just saying, what, I'm gonna kind of forge my own path now.
Oh, huge.
According to expectations or whatever.
I don't know if I shared this with you, Nas, but hey, I'm so glad that you decided to like swerve and let me be a part of the event, because at that event, and I don't know if I shared this with you before, but I remember sitting in some of the talks, right? There are people from all large corporations, Delta, Gap, also, huge, medical systems, like nationwide stuff. Great opportunity to network. Like if I wanted to get my foot in the door someplace, this was the learning community. So people that were, corporate learning, exactly where I needed to be. I was 2 weeks, that I'd transitioned from Hyatt. So I was like in limbo. And I remember sitting in these talks and all these presenters and going, nope, I don't want to be here at all. Like, that's not the life I want. This is not the type of the work I want to do. It was just so, it was this knowing right away. The people were amazing. I enjoyed so much, like getting to know people, and we had a lot of fun. I think you and I kept going out to talk to you about stuff. I'm just like, I don't know, just talking to people, being friendly. But I remember distinctly having this feeling of, nope, not anymore. And specifically because I heard them talk about things in the realm of learning and education and corporate education, that I'm like, we're still talking about this? It's been like 15 years that I've been in this field, and the same topics are recycled over and over again with like another strategy and another solution. And look, I'm not taking anything away from the efforts made, but it just never appealed to me. As I was listening, I was just like, I can't do this. I don't want to work at any of these companies, but I don't know what I want to do. And so I took a few mentors, and literally maybe 6 months after that experience is, when I decided to hang the shingle and got my LLC and all that for my business. There was some really wonderful divine intervention in between, but I'm so glad I went, because otherwise I would have been chasing okay, well, I need to get in at that level again, and I need to figure out what other company, Wells Fargo, and that was just like now I know what I don't want. So thank you.
No, which is big, but I mean, which is big. And because in my mind, I was thinking, sort of in line with that whole philosophy of that, it's just that one straight line you go on. And I'm like, it's okay. Valerie will come, she'll network, she'll meet someone, she'll get a job, like everything will be wrapped up nicely, and she'll be back in the corporate world. It's all good. She'll be okay. Cause it's just like, then she'll be back on that path again. Right. And, and just the fact that and I do recall you telling me, it made you decide not to do it. And I'm like, what? Like, I mean, that's sort of like, it's so great that you were like, you got the insight into what you didn't want to do, because that's almost more important than knowing what you want to do, right? Is like, I know what I don't want to do, which is great. So yeah, what a journey though, right?
Oh, so cool. So everybody needs a Nas in their life, by the way. Our generosity also multiplies. We have no idea, the impact that a yes or a no could have on the life of someone, the trajectory of a life, so.
But also the power of networking, because I think like I actually only came across because it was Daniel Gandarilla who introduced us, right? So he's somebody, I had a speaker and I said, I'm looking for somebody to lead us. And he's like, well, I know Valerie. I don't know if you guys worked together before, maybe.
No, he saw me because I facilitated a session for executive education at University of Texas here in Dallas. I did for learning, for people in the learning community. I facilitated a session like a year or two before.
Oh, interesting.
So like just the power of the network. Yeah,
for sure.
Daniel and I, we weren't particularly friends. We just met at that event and probably LinkedIn, and then that was it. So I'm so glad. It's so funny. Like all the divine, Connie and I talk about these things all the time. Our, our spiritual philosophy is very aligned. But Connie, love to hear your reaction.
It's interesting because the what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm blanking a little bit. It's kind of it reminds me of the nature versus nurture, right? Is it the environment that we're moving through that helps us to define like what we're passionate about or what our path in life is going to be? Or is it something that is biologically instilled in us? And, I over time, I have embraced the idea that almost everything is some of both, that I love, Valerie, hearing you talk about like going to that seminar. It's like, oh yeah, this is definitely not it anymore. And we talk about that a lot, when we do those business internships with the middle school students, and they don't always work out. Like, our kids had a great experience with you, Valerie, but that doesn't always happen. And then we'll say, you know what, now you know what you don't want to do, right? So what a valuable learning experience. But like how does one know what they really want to do until they try some things? And how is one thing more right for someone than for another, or a better fit? So I really think about on all of our life's journeys and the things that we are exploring about ourselves as we go through the steps in life, reflecting on the this is just how I'm wired. And I do think there's a component of that. I know that when I'm going to do something, I need to plan ahead. I need to practice it a few times. That is my process. And I know it's my process because it's how I'm wired. Some of it's experiential because, there's been times when I haven't done it and, things did not work out so well. And so, but mostly I know that I am most calm and peaceful and ready when I do those steps. But that isn't the next person's process, right? So I can actually probably drive a few people crazy with my need for planning and preparation and, getting there, 45 minutes ahead of time to, make sure something didn't fall through the cracks and those types of things where, for someone else, the spontaneous approach is much more aligned with their personality style. So so I think it's such an interesting consideration when we think about how your business life has evolved, Valerie, and where it started in something that was very structured and not necessarily designed by you. I think is what I'm hearing you say, right? It's like, you're kind of recycling the same ideas that have been recycled for years and years. And then moving to something where, what I'm hearing you say is, where you have more agency and where your creativity can flourish. And, I love that awareness. And that doesn't mean that the earlier path in your career isn't right for somebody else. You just figured out that, oh my gosh, the light bulb went off. Oh my gosh, this isn't right for me. Being willing to take that jag, it's like we were talking about earlier, like, life is, has the little lefts and right turns, and you did a big old right turn, right? And
I don't know if it was that big. I feel like I was led. I really do. Truth be told, I know that I was led. Every single thing, I could paint a picture of the year for you. You would have been like, oh, yeah. I mean, it's on the outside, I'm sure it looks that way, right? If you see it on paper.
Yeah.
But the process, and I imagine the two of you would stay the same. Like if you were to really peel back the layers and the experiences and the people you met and the conversations you had and the resource, the book that dropped in your lap, like, oh, that was designed.
Yeah.
Like talk about the life well design. Yeah.
I jotted that down real quickly. Yeah. That book, like, ooh, okay. But I will say though, Valerie, for some and maybe many, the confidence and the courage that it takes to walk away from the security and the paycheck of corporate America, so that I think is where like the outsider looking in, or even I'm not an outsider in your life, right? Like the person looking into your life might say like, ooh, big right turn, you go girl, right? And I think, I do suspect we'll see more of that, post-pandemic. I'm already experiencing that in, my world where people are like, yep, time for me to try something new, moving, trying new jobs and those types of things. And so, but, you did it at a time when, life wasn't, I don't know what, turning up the fire on all of us of like looking at, are we really living the life we want to, the life we've designed for ourselves, or are we living that, as you were talking about, Nas, that path of just like, I'm supposed to do this next,
Right.
And so many of us were led down that path and, quite possibly rooted in our education, because that's how the education systems are set up. So,
right. Yeah. You definitely see a lot. Like there's a story right now about a couple, like they're originally from Ontario, but they were in New York, finance careers and so on. And then COVID I just went and stayed with her parents on a farm, and now they own like a it's sort of like grass-fed, dairy products from the farm, and they've just created this business. And so it's like kind of veering off that path that they thought. But I think it's great that you had mentioned middle school internships, right? Like, and I wish I had that when I was. I mean, I wish I'd had a guidance counselor, like, I mean, because like we never even did like take your kid to your work day. Like, my parents owned a bookstore in Kenya, and they had, some real estate stuff, but like, and I don't think their intention was that I would, take over the store or anything. Like, they always believed in higher education, wanted me to, get a degree and so on. But it was like that. I'd never been to an office in my life, coming out of, university and or coming out of high school and so on. And I find internship idea is just so great, because like you were saying, it tells you what, people learn what they don't want. They see something like you were saying, Valerie, you're sort of that non-traditional business, but just to be able to see that things are different. I think it's sort of part of how things are less homogeneous now, right? It's not, everybody doesn't work in a factory. Everybody doesn't work in now corporate America. Will have all these different jobs. I think social media has just opened up this whole other area of people just being able to monetize, pictures they take or something. It's like I'm making money off of this. I'm like, how is this possible? But it's amazing how, I've seen one of my friends who's, has a PhD in organizational psychology. And who's really, I've seen her journey. We haven't really talked about it, but I've seen her journey just through her social media posts, where she's kind of, in a way pivoted, where she was, she still does teach part-time, but she's also, very much about kind of living a sort of healthier lifestyle from a nutrition perspective. So, diets are bad, don't go on diets and stuff like that, but just very much talking about her own personal experience, but then just her journey of how she parlayed it through a social media lens. It's so interesting. And that's a whole other area where people are going to say, I don't need to work for anyone. I don't need to work for a big corporation. I don't need to clock in a job. If I can work remotely. I feel like this, COVID's going to shake things up, quite a bit in terms of people's realization that they can work from anywhere and do different things and be okay doing it.
I just had a big insight while you were sharing. I don't know if it's that big. I thought of it, but never in these terms. So my mother is an educator. She, that's her background. And we immigrated from Panama. She basically had to leave her educational role behind because we were moving around so much. And in the States, it required a whole different level of certification. And she was like, I don't have the time, or with, 4 kids, we're moving, I don't have that. But what she did for us is we were always involved in the community. She's a huge believer in volunteer service. So, we're talking about not going to an office until after, after college. And I'm like, oh, we did stuff like that all the time. Like my mom during the summers, her thing was you get 2 weeks to like play around and hang out and eat Pop-Tarts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But after 2 weeks, go find something to do. And I remember during my primary years, we'd go with her and, either volunteer at a church, or she used to work for, in Hawaii, she worked for Honolulu Theater for Youth, which was in downtown Honolulu. Wow. In an office. And she would either have us, stapling programs or organizing costumes or whatever the theater company needed. But every summer it was something else. So we kind of, now that I'm thinking, I don't think I ever thought I had a Montessori education from my mom.
Totally. And you had a whole bunch of internships.
Tons of internships, tons of experiential, activities. And I'm like, oh, that's what has continued to drive me. Somehow it really aligned with who I am. But I could talk to you guys for hours. I really could. I think we only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
So now you can actually respond to each other's emails and have a meaningful conversation.
Yes.
Now
and have the context. Yeah. No, for sure. Yes. Yeah.
But I do want to be responsible for the listeners and the time. So I'm just starting to kind of pull in some of these threads. I'm curious now, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. What has been your experience in this conversation today? Like, what are you left with compared to when we started to now?
I'd say for me, it's sort of what's the word? Reinforcement of the fact that I love talking and talking to strangers. And so like my kids will always say, you talk to anyone for so much time. They just know, like they've learned to kind of equip themselves with, not pulling on my arm and telling me to hurry up, because they're like, she's not going to stop talking, because it's just like you learn so much, about other people. So it's reinforced that. It's also given, I just think hearing, like I was saying, just wanting to read the bios, hearing Connie's story, hearing your story, like you've sort of done things differently to that, like sort of linear path that I always think one must be on this linear path. And it's just so invigorating to hear, the peace and the calm and the belonging that you feel in what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing, yeah, maybe it was a risk doing things, the way you did it. And maybe in hindsight, when you look back, it's like what you were saying, Valerie, where it's like, when you look back, everything makes sense.
Yeah.
You can weave a story around the journey you've taken and everything can make sense. But when you're in that moment, you're like, I don't really know if it's going to work out, but you do it, you're brave, right? You do it. And that's kind of, I think, sort of taught me a little bit about that, about how it's okay to not follow that linear path.
Yes. We give you permission, Nas.
Yeah.
Tell her outside the lines a little bit.
We're going to be your cheerleaders for the going off the path. So, yeah, gosh, for me, I do talk with a lot of people in my job, right? That, part of my job is not only, connecting with the faculty and staff at the school, but also with the parents of the children, and then prospective parents of, families who are considering our school. And so, it's interesting. I hadn't really realized until I've been in this job. I've been a school director now, I guess this is my 9th year as a school director, after having taught for 16 years, I guess. So, it was very different for me. And I noticed that, what I came to understand is, I really do love talking to people. And by nature, I'm quite introverted. And so during this time that I've been in this school leader role, I have found myself being less and less social. Because I am very introverted, but my job is very extroverted. I said to my mom a couple of years ago, like, I finally realized that I'm an introverted person in an extroverted world. She's like, oh my gosh, Connie, that is so true. And she had never considered it that way either. I was always like the quiet kid, and so these kinds of conversations are really good for me. Like Valerie and I are usually pretty good about like scheduling time together, right? Because it's also a big job, especially in the pandemic year. And so, this is my opportunity to officially apologize to Nas. We passed on emails back and forth quite a bit, and about 9 months ago, and then but my lag time in between emails was significant. So so recognizing that, by like having a defined time that I'm going to sit down and just get to know somebody just for the heck of it, that's an awesome thing, and I get a lot out of it. But in my day-to-day life, I won't necessarily naturally choose it, because I'm often restoring from, that extroverted life that I'm living, that I love. And I'm so glad that I'm living it. And I spend a lot of my weekend time kind of, in more solitude. So this is such a great opportunity. And I think it's one of the things that's been so great about our interactions with each other, Valerie, is just like, we're gonna set a time and we're gonna hold to it. And we always, we're both very busy women, and I'm sure there are times when it's just like, oh man, I'm so busy, here comes another meeting. But I know that, at least for myself, I always feel restored by it. And that's what this experience has been, is like restorative. And also restorative, like energetically, but restorative, and I hope this doesn't sound too corny, like faith in humanity, right? Like there's really amazing people out there in this world. And sometimes, we don't see a lot of that these days. I guess we see it, but it's also, I'm in the pandemic, I've had to pay attention to the news a lot more than I normally would. I kind of stay in my bubble in the world. And part of that is, I'm super sensitive. So stuff really, really hurts my soul. But I've had to pay attention to the news in my job. So So I said to my husband, I was like, man, the world is really so messed up right now. And he's just like, Connie, you're just paying attention more now. This isn't very.
It's always been messed up.
and there's probably truth to that. There's a part of me that's ready to go back into the bubble. But this has been a great opportunity for me to just also recognize that. Remember to keep making connections with other people, because that's really where the restoring faith in humanity comes in, is by the more kind of one-on-one opportunities to connect.
I love that. You just need to make your bubble bigger. That's all.
Yeah. my personal bubble.
Just make it bigger. Get it from people. I've enjoyed so much this experience in the conversation. I always do. I'm seldom, I don't think ever. This is the 22nd episode, I believe, and I've not ever had that moment of like, man, that was a letdown. Every conversation is so different.
And I just want to say, I'm blown away that this is your 22nd episode already. You just start doing this. This particular podcast, like, this one, man, girl, productivity. Yeah, you are knocking them out.
This is like a Saturday chat for me, so that's why it's not that hard. The last podcast I had 101 episodes, and then I decided to pivot into this one, and just kicked off in January.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, it's just been a few months. By the time this episode is aired, it's going to be well beyond that, but it's not been that long. But the last question I have for the two of you is, what surprised you most about this experience?
That is a good question. I had zero expectations going into it. I think I trust you so much, Valerie, and I kind of just came into it very open. So I don't know that I've been particularly surprised, other than, reminding myself is probably a better word, referring back to what I was just saying. It's like reminding myself of like, I got to expand the bubble a little more. Like instead of like, cocooning in my downtime, recognizing that this is part of my downtime too, is making sure that I connect with people on a 1-to-1 basis or a 3-to-1 basis.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I like talking to strangers. I like, kind of meeting people and just talking to them. So I knew that this would be good because, I know you, Valerie, and I knew the conversation would flow, but I think similar to what Connie said, a lot of my talking, a lot of the people I talk to, it's all work related. It's all, I could call somebody up, have a conversation with them. That's, no problem. But it's like, I don't think I've ever had, a conversation like this, with just sort of more personal, because it allows you to delve into things that are about you. When you're talking to clients, it's about them, right? It's never really talking about yourself. And it's so nice to be able to, talk about a range of issues, think back to, things like around our childhoods and what we're doing now and what's important to us. And, that kind of carving out that personal time. But with people who don't really know you that well, I feel like there's that magic middle kind of area where it's like, you're never going to be clients. So I don't think of you in that way. And, we didn't grow up together, we don't have history together. But when you can find, when you can speak to each other for, over an hour and a half or something like that, like, I feel like there's a magic in there.
Yeah.
You find these synergies, and like what Connie was saying, that humanity, the shared humanity, the desire to see things in see a positive world and so on. I think that's sort of what's been nice about it as well.
We are the hope and the promise.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, ladies, thank you so much. I am so grateful that both of you said yes, and that you behaved during the podcast. I didn't put anybody in timeout.
Was there a risk that we weren't going to?
There was no risk. It was just, a nice school reference to this. And I don't know, how do you do this in Montessori? You time out? I don't know. Ring the bell and you're
ring the bell.
I never had to ring the bell.
There you
We were
go.
so engaged. So thank you so much for sharing yourselves, sharing your resources, your passion, your interests. I hope that everyone that, those of you who are listening or watching, that you found some inspiration, something that, sparked your curiosity. I will make sure I put some information about Montessori education in case people want to go back and perhaps consider that as a career path or as a path to educate their children. But I think is worthwhile. And if nothing else, the spirit of Montessori, I think you heard in everything that we shared. So thank you again, the two of you. Thank you so much for bringing, you came to play. It's great. Perfect. And those tuning in, please don't forget to subscribe. Go to www.notquitestrangers.com. That way you will not miss a single episode. They'll come straight to your inbox, or you can go to my YouTube channel as well. And you'll see the link below where you can subscribe for any episode and you'll get notified whenever they come up. So thank you all so much for joining us. Nas, Connie, thank you again for being here with us today. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day.
Good to meet you, Nas.
Nice meeting you too, Connie.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.